So, God is love. So is love a substance of God? That's actually part of God?
Yes, it's a substance of God. So divine love, what I'm calling divine love, is a substance that exists within God. It's separate to the universe itself. It does not exist in the universe itself without it being transmitted from God to a soul in the universe. So it can exist in the universe only through transmission from God. Whereas the natural love, which is a different form of love, a different substance again, can be transmitted between yourself and myself, and we do not need to involve God in the transmission of that particular substance. And in fact, every single emotion that we actually have is a substance of some kind. And it therefore makes sense that one of the emotions that transforms our soul, which is God's love, must be also a substance. Yes.
So when we receive divine love, we're actually receiving a part of God into us.
Yes.
And that's part of the reason why our soul expands.
Exactly. It's a particle. It's obviously a particle that exists from a physics perspective. A particle that enters us that has the ability, the way God's designed our soul, has the ability to transform it, has the ability to make it transform into a new creature. It's very different from all other substances that can enter our soul, because all other substances that come from within our universe that enter our soul, and there are many of those, many of those cannot transform us into anything beyond what our original nature was created to be. So it's a very, very different type of substance. And in fact, my, again, assumption is that God may have other types of substances besides God's love that could potentially enter us as well and transform us in a different direction. And but I've yet to fully discover those substances. I have some assumptions that I've made about some of those substances, and I'm experimenting with the ability to absorb them, but as yet I have not personally discovered the other substances that could have the same transforming effect.
So what do you think they are?
Well, one that comes to mind immediately is wisdom as a substance from God. In that if you examine the universe very, very carefully, you can see that it is very, very complex in its nature, and it's full of highly developed intelligence. And even if we look at our Earth, we can see the intelligence required to design something like a body of any kind, like a physical form of any kind, such as an animal, a dog, a cat, or so forth, or a human body. Huge amounts of intelligence involved in creating such a form. And that being the case, there must be huge amounts of intelligence available inside of God. Now, as you receive divine love, your capacity to absorb intellectual things or absorb knowledge grows. And so we have the capacity to understand things intellectually. But the wisdom of how to use them together and to create a framework in which they all operate together without self-destruction and without anarchy, this is an entirely different set of things that constrain the physical universe. And so from my perspective, I see discovery in two different areas really that are important. Firstly, there's the discovery of what the creations are themselves, and I'm always fascinated in anything discovering in that direction. But there's also the discovery of the laws that constrain or control the creation, or constrain the universe in which we exist. And those laws seem to have a different nature altogether. They're like a framework that exists without a physical form. But they must have some kind of form, some kind of energetic structure to exist, very much like a law of gravity, for example, is created through mass creating gravity, and we have some kind of structure that creates gravity. And so we know that if we have a small mass, then there's a small amount of gravity. If we have a large mass, then there's a larger amount of gravity. And these other laws must also exist in a similar forms that we can at some point measure. But you know, there are just so many of those laws, an infinite number, it appears, of those laws even, that to me that's another area of fascinating examination. So examination of the laws is even more interesting than the examination of the creation that the laws create. And I sort of see it as the creation, then there's the laws that constrain the creation, which if you think of it like a layers of an onion, there's the internal layer, which is the creation itself. Then there's the outside layer, which is the laws or the structure that actually control that creation. And we've discovered many of those laws, many of them pertain to love, and we've discovered in the universe many of those laws, but I still feel there's many more of those laws to discover. And the more of those laws we discover, we may find that there is another layer that controls the laws somehow before we even get to the layer that allows us to understand God completely. So, these are all just assumptions that we can make based on what's already been discovered and using that as a foundation to go ahead with further discovery.
So is God's laws, what's the law made of? Is it an intention of God? Or?
Well, yes, I feel quite strongly that, again, it must be made up of a substance of some kind of energy or substance. It has to have existed before the universe came into existence. So therefore, it has to be made up of a similar type of substance that God is made up of, if you think about it in some way, or a substance closer to the substance that God is made up of. And this is why my real fascination is more with the laws than it is with the physical the physical examination of creation. The physical examination of creation is obviously made up of a completely different substance to what God's made up of, because it existed after God existed, so therefore was created by God. But before those physical substances came into existence, the laws had to have come into existence. So therefore they have to be made up of a different type of substance that is even present within the universe, although the laws have to be present upon the universe to operate and force the universe to conform to God's intentions or desires. So for that reason, we could then presume that the laws have to be closer to God's nature than the physical creation is. And so that's why my areas of investigation, right from shortly after I discovered the whole process of receiving divine love, has been focused more upon the laws and God's nature in terms of the feelings that I could feel from God than on the physical investigation of life itself and matter on earth or matter in the physical world. Yeah.